LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the October 22nd edition of LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me tonight. I've picked out the weekend's 11 best, most newsworthy clips for what should be a really educational, fair use media criticism and political analysis show for you all tonight. The one political comedy source I have for you is a little under 3-minute clip from HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher, Bill Maher's monologue, where he tackles the one big topic I'm covering, which is Trump's controversy or attack on a military widow, a Democratic congresswoman from Florida, Frederica Wilson, and how his chief of staff, John Kelly, got pulled into that, and then some of the larger issues it raises about the United States war powers. You know, what were those soldiers doing in Niger anyway, and should Congress have more accountability on U.S. military action given what's in the U.S. Constitution about war powers. You know, I have my handy U.S. Constitution here. I will have a clip from Chuck Schumer, the Senate Minority Leader, from Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader, as well as several other newsmakers, and I will be comparing the coverage of this conflict between Trump and this military widow from several different corporate outlets, the big 5 corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, what I call the corporate media here in the United States. But as promised, I am going to start off. Oh, and there will be bonus Sandy clip where I thought Sandy might not get out of bed for the show, but then she did get out of bed. I will be showing that somewhere in the show for the Sandy fans out there. But as promised, I will start off with 3 minutes of the Bill Maher monologue. You can see the entire monologue. You can also see my entire clip list of the 11 clips at a link down in the video description. There's also a link to the entire Bill Maher monologue from last Friday, available free on YouTube. This is a little under 3 minutes on the topic of the day, the topic that dominated most of the Sunday morning news analysis shows, the conflict between Trump and this military widow, which I will discuss with you after we watch that clip together over here.
All of this came about because the same Trump pattern: bluff, lie, attack. Because, you know, he doesn't know anything. So when he's asked about something, he's got to bluff. And then when they call him out, when they call him on the bluff, then he lies. And then when they call him on the lie, he attacks. So this is exactly what happened. 3 weeks ago, 4 of our Green Berets were killed in the African country of Niger, and Trump didn't say anything for 2 weeks. But someone put him on the spot about it last week, so he bluffed and said, I wrote them letters. Of course he didn't. Probably didn't even know about them because they didn't do anything that would get on his radar, like kneel at a football game. Calm down, Bill. Like 2 minutes into this story, my head's gonna explode. Anyway, but then he says, forget the letters. I was just waiting for the right time to call, which in the case of the widow of Sergeant LaDavid Johnson turned out to be when she was in the car going to the airport to accept the body. This is when Trump thinks it is a good time to say to her he knew what he signed up for. Somewhere Rex Tillerson is saying, I told you he was a moron. And then Trump drags General John Kelly, his chief of staff, into this because Kelly's own son was killed in Afghanistan, and Obama never called. So he sends out Kelly yesterday to defend his own inept call and stupid lies, and I feel bad for General Kelly having to defend this vile nincompoop. On the other hand, he knew what he signed up for. Now, look, I know General Kelly is the only thing that stands between us and World War III. But this was not his finest hour. He spent a lot of time smearing this congresswoman who was in the car doing her job, and she was a friend supporting the widow when Trump's call came in. So Kelly does what Republicans always do. They invent new rules. I thought I had new rules. No, they have new rules. Like, you know, if you criticize the president overseas, it insults the troops. Oh, is that? Yeah, that's always been. No, they just. So he invents this new rule: a phone call from a president to a widow is sacred, and if it comes on a speakerphone, you can't listen in. First of all, she wasn't listening in. She didn't tap the woman's phone. She happened to be in the car. And also, what kind of cretin in the whole history of the world has ever had to deny something he said during a condolence call?
So I thought there were several good punchlines in there. I mean, including that last one, and I especially like the analysis that clip began with, where I think Bill Maher put it most succinctly about Trump's pattern, where he bluffs because a lot of what Donald Trump says when he's asked questions sounds to me like, and this analysis is not original with me, but like that kid who like is trying to give a book report, just like reading the back of the book or like the title of the book, and it's like, yeah, I read the book, and you know, it was a great book, it was a tremendous book, it was one of the best books I ever read, and it was, you know, it's like that's kind of like Trump's bluff strategy, and so it's bluff, lie, and attack, and I think that was a very succinct way of putting what happens to Trump's over and over again. And what was kind of sad about it is the way that he pulled in General John Kelly, his chief of staff, although I don't know, I'm starting to have some doubts about John Kelly. You know, he's supposedly like the adult in the room, and he's saving us from Trump, like Bill Maher said there in his monologue, that he's saving us from World War III. But he went and he attacked this Democratic Congresswoman, Frederica Wilson, based supposedly on his own memory of what happened, and then it was contradicted by this video. And why did he remember it that way? That, you know, that seems, I mean, he saw this whole speech where this black woman in a cowboy hat who has, you know, a certain kind of voice and cadence, where she gave all this honor to the FBI building. That's what, and I'm going to show you several news clips that analyze this in different ways, where Frederica Wilson actually honored the FBI, not what General John Kelly claimed that she did, where she just like stood up and grandstanded. And it's like he thinks that she's like he remembers her as like an uppity black woman from a speech where that is not really the context. And it makes me think since he was there and he saw the speech and that's what he remembers, I think maybe it shows John Kelly's biases. And he is not doesn't have the greatest record in the world in terms, he was wanted Guantanamo to be stricter and give less rights, and he's for not punishing people without trial, and he was for increasing the drug war, and of course he was the head of Homeland Security when they ramped up the deportations at the beginning of the Trump administration, and anyway, so I think that John Kelly could be the real casualty of this whole debacle, with the military widow and her family friend, Congresswoman Frederica Wilson, getting attacked by Trump and then by John Kelly. And there are a whole bunch of facts that you don't see in all of... I'm going to show you a few different news summaries, and they emphasize different facts and they leave out different facts. The NBC News one that I'm going to show first is the longest one, but not the best one. It's almost 4 minutes long, but you'll see that they spend some time starting with this Trump versus military widow controversy and then talking about the loss of civility, and that's what they do best on. They bring in the Steve Bannon attack on Mitch McConnell, which I'll have a clip from Mitch McConnell on a little bit later. But I don't think they do that good a job of showing what Chief of Staff John Kelly did wrong, and that he basically lied about what this Congresswoman Frederica Wilson said in her speech back in, I think it was 2015, in the dedication of this FBI building. And I'll talk about that a little more with you after we watch this 3-minute, 45-second clip from NBC's Meet the Press this morning over here.
It was the week when attention should have been focused on issues with real-life consequences, the future of health care, tax cuts, and an ambush in the African country of Niger that resulted in 4 American servicemen being killed. But it was a sideshow around that Niger battle, what President Trump reportedly said to the widow of one of the fallen soldiers, that dominated headlines and illuminated once again the erosion of civility in our politics. The serial battles that President Trump engages in with Democrats, the media, and even members of his own party appeared to prompt two former presidents and a former presidential nominee to lament the lowering of the national discourse in the age of Twitter, and by implication, at the person they believe is responsible for it. The latest Twitter/cable catnip soap opera began when President Trump claimed incorrectly that he alone among presidents has made a point of calling and comforting the families of American service members who died in defense of their country.
If you look at President Obama and other presidents, most of them didn't make calls. A lot of them didn't make calls.
An ugly week in politics when even condolences to Gold Star military families became politicized.
Didn't say what that congresswoman said. Didn't say it at all. She knows it.
Florida Congresswoman Frederica Wilson says the president told the widow of Sergeant LaDavid Johnson that your guy knew what he signed up for.
He doesn't need to talk about what people sign up for. That is unconscionable.
Mr. Trump, rather than going out himself, sent his chief of staff to clean up the mess.
It stuns me that a member of Congress would have listened in on that conversation.
If you want to get into a debate with a four-star Marine general, I think that that's something highly inappropriate.
Last night, all 5 living former presidents gathered in Texas to raise money for hurricane relief, an effort they are calling the One America Appeal.
The heart of America, without regard to race or religion or political party, is greater than our problems.
Mr. Trump taped a video message as well.
Through this effort, all 5 living former presidents are playing a tremendous role in helping our fellow citizens recover.
It was a show of unity after a week in which Presidents Bush and Obama broke the ex-president's club code of silence and indicted President Trump's brand of politics without ever mentioning him by name.
Bigotry seems emboldened. Our politics seems more vulnerable to conspiracy theories and outright fabrication.
If you have to win a campaign by dividing people, you're not going to be able to govern them.
Echoing another rebuke of President Trump, this one by Senator John McCain.
For the sake of some half-baked, spurious nationalism cooked up by people who would rather find scapegoats than solve problems.
While the White House chose not to respond to either former president's critique, Mr. Trump's former chief strategist, Steve Bannon, did respond in a blistering attack on President Bush Friday night and called for open revolt inside the Republican Party.
President Bush, to me, embarrassed himself. He has no earthly idea whether he's coming or going. Just like it was when he was president of the United States. There has not been a more destructive presidency than George Bush's.
And as for the president himself, he so far has only responded directly to Senator McCain.
People have to be careful because at some point I fight back. Yeah. You know, I'm being very nice. I'm being very, very nice. But at some point I fight back, and it won't be pretty.
Well, joining me now is...
Oh, it's not going to be pretty sometime in the future. Like, this week was pretty. I think you can tell from that NBC report that this week was not pretty, and it was. I like the way that NBC pivoted from this particular controversy over to the bigger attack on Trump from the former presidents and the Bannon attack on Mitch McConnell, which I said I'm going to have a clip from Mitch McConnell talking about that a little bit later, even though it's only vaguely related to the main topic. But what I think, as I said before, I showed the clip, NBC Meet the Press did not really show very well that John Kelly lied about what Frederica Wilson, the congresswoman from Florida, said at this speech dedicating an FBI building, and also didn't really emphasize that Sarah Huckabee Sanders comment that you can't question generals, which I thought ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, hosted this week by Martha Raddatz, did the very best job of doing both those things. And it's kind of interesting because Martha Raddatz, as I've talked about many, many times over the years, is very close to the military. She has really good military sources. Sometimes she serves almost as a spokesperson for the military. But in this case, she is very critical of what John Kelly did, and especially critical of what Sarah Huckabee Sanders said that you can't question generals, because I guess that, in a way, that's her job. Since she's so close to the military and she's a reporter with the military, she does question generals, and she's done it many times, even though she sometimes ends up really empathizing with them. And she does empathize with General or former General John Kelly in this clip as well. First empathy, and then good criticism of much better than you saw on NBC from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos and permanent substitute host Martha Raddatz here.
On the air this week, we're seeing success in one war with the defeat of ISIS in Raqqa, Syria. Preparations for what may be the war ahead. You see us there on the deck of the USS Reagan during an American show of force this week in the waters off Korea. And an emotional war of words here at home, sparked by debate over President Trump's phone calls to families of the fallen, and to one widow in particular, the wife of a Green Beret killed in Niger earlier this month. On Tuesday, Trump called the family of that fallen soldier, Sergeant LaDavid Johnson. But a longtime family friend, Democratic Congresswoman Frederica Wilson, was also listening in and said the family was not comforted by the president's words. By Thursday, Chief of Staff John Kelly was in the briefing room defending the president. Kelly's words were raw, emotional, and personal as he spoke about the loss of his own son in Afghanistan in 2010.
Let me tell you what my best friend, Joe Dunford, told me, because he was my casualty officer. He said, Kel, he was doing exactly what he wanted to do when he was killed. He knew what he was getting into by joining that 1%. He knew what the possibilities were because we're at war.
If General Kelly had stopped there, this debate would likely be over. As a nation, we almost certainly could have agreed to make those painfully intimate words the last words. Instead, using the language of a political operative, Kelly then attacked that Florida congresswoman who had criticized the president, accusing her of being disrespectful at a 2015 building dedication to fallen FBI agents.
And a congresswoman stood up, and in the long tradition of empty barrels making the most noise, stood up there and all of that, and talked about how she was instrumental in getting the funding for that building. And she just called up President Obama, and on that phone call, he gave the money, the $20 million to build the building. And she sat down.
The problem with that account, it just wasn't true. As video from the 2015 event shows Wilson using most of her remarks to pay tribute to the fallen. But instead of apologizing, instead of correcting the record, the White House doubled down.
If you want to get into a debate with a four-star Marine general, I think that that's something highly inappropriate.
Sanders later said anyone can be questioned, but her defense didn't sit well, even among some of Trump's allies.
The White House press secretary today said it was highly inappropriate to get in a debate with a four-star general. Do you agree with that?
No, not in America.
But this did happen in America.
It did happen in America. Thank you, Martha. And I thought that was the most incisive of all the different coverages, the different networks covering this particular controversy. Though, I mean, it didn't really cover the one thing that it missed, I think, is that when John Kelly came out and talked about, you know, the poignant part where he talked about his advice about what he was told when his son was killed, and that was actually confirming what the Congresswoman Frederica Wilson had said, Trump said in the condolence call. And that isn't also completely clear in the CBS summary. The CBS summary was also pretty good. The one point that I would quibble with in the CBS coverage I'm about to show is that they they give enough information for you to be able to tell that Trump lied when he said that, you know, I never said that, there, you know, and I have proof, and I never said. Well, he did say the thing about how, you know, he knew what he was getting into. It was, you know, it was what John Kelly had told him, but he didn't phrase it that well, or the family took it wrong. But that's also, that information's available in the CBS News summary I'm about to show, but you have to like put it together yourself. They don't point out to you that Trump lied when he said he didn't say it in this clip.
The political controversy over Gold Star families began with a question to President Trump on Monday about why he had not mentioned the loss of the 4 soldiers in the 12 days after they were killed in Niger.
If you look at President Obama and other presidents, most of them didn't make calls. A lot of them didn't make calls.
That was not accurate, as staffers for previous presidents pointed out. Then a harsher criticism. When the president called the wife of fallen soldier LaDavid Johnson, Democratic Congresswoman Frederica Wilson accused Mr. Trump of being disrespectful to the grieving widow.
I was in the car when President Trump called. He never said the word hero. He said to the wife, well, I guess he knew what he was getting into. How insensitive can you be?
The president denied it on Twitter, and the next day, Chief of Staff and 4-star Marine General John Kelly made a stunning statement. Citing his personal experience when he was notified of his own son's death in 2010, he said he'd advise the president not to make calls.
I said to him, sir, there's nothing you can do to lighten the burden on these families. But let me tell you what I tell them. Let me tell you what my best friend, Joe Dunford, told me, because he was my casualty officer. He said, Kel, he was doing exactly what he wanted to do when he was killed. He knew what he was getting into by joining that 1%. He knew what the possibilities were because we're at war. That's what the president tried to say to 4 families the other day. I was stunned when I came to work yesterday morning and brokenhearted at what I saw a member of Congress doing. A member of Congress who listened in on a phone call from the President of the United States to a young wife, and in his way tried to express that opinion. He's a brave man, a fallen hero.
Kelly's criticism of Congresswoman Wilson didn't end there. He accused her of bragging about getting funding for an FBI building at a ceremony honoring 2 FBI agents killed in the line of duty.
To recognize the family of Special Agent Ross.
But videos surfaced of the Congresswoman's speech that contradicted Kelly's story. We can't tell you how this saga will end, but we will talk about it with another Gold Star.
And they actually talked with Khizr Khan. They remember the guy who held up his Constitution at the Democratic Convention, who lost his son, Captain Khan, in one of the many American wars, and talked about how as a Muslim American he was a real American and he didn't appreciate the attacks on Muslims from Donald Trump. Well, he was a guest on Face the Nation, and that I didn't take a clip of that. There's actually several things I didn't cover. I didn't cover the ongoing debate about tax reform and tax cuts that was covered. There was a little bit on the possible Obamacare replacement I didn't cover, and some of the Me Too and sexual harassment debate was, and especially over was it? I think it was on NBC's Meet the Press. They had like several different Congress members of the Senate who did their Me Too's. Did I get that right? Whatever. I didn't take clips of any of that, but down in the video description, I have links to the full-length versions of all the Big 5 corporate outlets that I take my clips from, so you can click on any of those and watch the entire episodes and watch all those other topics being covered. But I have one more news summary. This is the Fox News Sunday news summary. Dana Perino, for her first time, is guest hosting the Fox News Sunday program that is usually hosted by Chris Wallace, and their summary is just ridiculous. They leave out basically almost all of the dishonesty from Trump and John Kelly, and well, it's only about a little over 90 seconds long. Let's watch it together, and then I will explain. Well, you can see for yourself. After you watch it, you'll see all the missing facts that I will discuss with you after we watch it together here.
He was so offended because he was in the room when I made the call, and so were other people. And the call was a very nice call. He was so offended that somebody would be listening to that call. He actually couldn't believe it. Actually, he said to me, "Sir, this is not acceptable."
President Trump defending his chief of staff in an interview with Fox's Maria Bartiromo, saying the Congresswoman's attacks on John Kelly were, quote, sickening. And it's time now for our Sunday group, former Republican Congressman Jason Chaffetz, who's now a Fox News contributor, columnist for The Hill, Juan Williams, Julie Pace, Washington bureau chief for the Associated Press, and editor-in-chief of the Washington Free Beacon, Matthew Continetti. You know, I've had a chance to be on the panel, but to never run the panel, so I'll try to do my best. So this is not a controversy that the White House anticipated before the Rose Garden press conference with Mitch McConnell. But as soon as President Trump referenced how his predecessors handled outreach to families of the fallen, I knew they would have a firestorm on their hands. And so the back and forth went on all week and included an appearance by General Kelly in the briefing room, a Gold Star father himself. And then this from Congresswoman Frederica Wilson. "I feel very sorry for him because he feels such a need to lie on me, and I'm not even his enemy." And it didn't end there. President Trump also took a stab at Wilson Saturday on Twitter. "I hope the fake news media keeps talking about wacky Congresswoman Wilson and that she, as a representative, is killing the Democrat Party." Julie, what is the White House thinking this morning?
So that was pretty ridiculous. Like I said before, I showed the clip, it left out pretty much all the damning facts. It didn't explain why Representative Frederica Wilson was saying that John Kelly lied about her. That was totally missing. It did come up in the panel discussion. Like the third panelist they got to was Juan Williams, and he did mention that John Kelly had lied about what Frederica Wilson said at the dedication of that FBI building. But that was like way buried in the Fox News coverage they made. They tried to keep that as quiet as possible, and that was pretty ridiculous. That's the last of the big five corporate outlets I'm going to show in terms of their news summaries. I only showed 4. I didn't show one from CNN because CNN's State of the Union actually kind of buried the story. They didn't do a news summary about the big conflict. They covered some other issues. They covered, North Korea and taxes and some of the other things I talked about. I am going to show a couple clips from Dana Bash on this issue, but before I get to, and she's talking to guests, she's talking to Democratic Senator Sherrod Brown, and then Republican Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. I can only hope someday he'll be Minority Leader again, but since this is a break between the news summaries and the newsmaker clips, I guess this is a good place to put in my bonus Sandy clips. First, I thought I might not have a good clip of Sandy getting ready for the show because she seemed very comfortable over in her bed. You can see this is Sandy in her bed. I didn't think she was going to get up, but she did end up getting up, and she came in to be my one live member of the studio audience. This is the video I took of Sandy settling down for the clips for all the Sandy fans out there. And that's where Sandy is right now, right? She actually is kind of even more laying down. She's like kind of more sideways and even deeper into the ground, if you can imagine it. But those are the bonus Sandy clips for the Sandy fans out there. And now I'm going to get to the newsmaker clips. The first one, I just criticized CNN's State of the Union, Dana Bash. This was a double Dana morning because you had Dana Perino and then I guess it's a Dana and a Dana. Dana Perino on Fox News Sunday, and then I'm going to give you the two Dana Bash clips where Dana Bash was guest hosting for Jake Tapper over on CNN State of the Union. Here she is after not really talking about the big conflict between Trump and his chief of staff John Kelly and this military widow and this congresswoman from Florida. she brings it up talking to Sherrod Brown, the Democratic senator from Ohio, asking him if there are white supremacists in the White House. And even though he's a senator from Ohio who needs to be moderate since Trump won Ohio by, what was it, 80,000 votes or something, but here is Sherrod Brown, I think, giving a fairly honest answer to the question, are there white supremacists in the White House over here?
Senator Sherrod Brown of Ohio. And Senator, there has been a major back and forth this week between the White House and Democratic Congresswoman Frederica Wilson. It all stems from her interpretation of the president's call to the widow of a fallen soldier. Now, the Congresswoman told the New York Times this week that the White House is full of white supremacists. You were at the White House this week. Do you agree with her?
I agree that Steve Bannon is a white supremacist, and Stephen Miller seems to be, and I know that studies have shown that they have their allies sprinkled around the White House. I think that, what's really interesting about this, Dan, is when the president attacks people like that, he almost never calls them by name. I think he thinks it sort of demeans them or dehumanizes them, or conversely, if he mentions their name and mentions the serviceman who gave his life for his country, if he mentions him by name, or the African-American congresswoman by name, maybe he thinks he's uplifting him and humanizing them too much for what he's trying to do. And I just think I'd say it's sad. It's worse than sad that the president engages in this kind of name calling without the name and tries to demean people that way and gets in these fights. I just wish he'd apologize. He could say, it didn't come out right. I'm sorry it came out that way. Of course I respect, and then mention the congresswoman by name and mention the widow by name. It would be a nice touch if the president would once in a while act that way instead of always attack, always demean the way he does too often.
I want to ask you, Senator.
So that was, like I said, a good answer, I think, from Sherrod Brown, the senator from Ohio. He, even though he doesn't want to alienate his, white working class voters who gave the state to Trump in the 2016 election, he still said, yeah, there are white supremacists in the White House. Steve Bannon was a white supremacist, and Stephen Miller, and sprinkled around the administration. He didn't say Trump is a white supremacist, although I think there is a good argument to be made for that. I have this book right here from Ta-Nehisi Coates, 8 Years in Power, which I'm in the middle of right now, actually, where he argues, and I've seen him interviewed on this subject, and I think I even showed a clip a couple weeks back, that Donald Trump is the first white president. He wrote an article in The Atlantic about that, because he could not have been elected, such a ridiculously unqualified president could not have been elected if there wasn't a backlash against the first black president, which makes him like the first white president because he had to be white. And that is where Trump got a lot of his voters. And anyway, so I thought that I was glad to see that Sherrod Brown actually admitted that there are white supremacists at least associated with this White House, but I think he could have been even stronger on white supremacy being integral to this White House. And speaking of Steve Bannon as a white supremacist, he's out there trying to attack the Republican establishment, and especially trying to get rid of Mitch McConnell. That's one of his big boogeymen, and he's gotten some support from Donald Trump on this. And Mitch McConnell was on a couple of the shows, including CNN State of the Union, where Dana Bash showed him a clip of Steve Bannon and got his reaction. I may actually do my Toby the Turtle impression, because winners, you have to be a winner to make policy. Losers go home and they get into another line of work. You got to slow and steady wins the race, and the winners get to make the policy. That's what Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell says in this next clip talking to Dana Bash. Yep.
Let's talk about former Trump advisor Steve Bannon. He declared war on you and the rest of the Republican establishment this week. Take a listen.
Now, Mitch, I don't know if you're watching today. I don't know if you're watching. I've been getting calls. It's like before the Ides of March, right? The only question is, and this is just an analogy or metaphor, whatever you want to call it, they're just looking to find out who's going to be Brutus to your Julius Caesar.
What do you make of Bannon recruiting candidates with the explicit goal, sir, of taking you out as leader?
Well, you know, this element has been out there for a while. They cost us 5 Senate seats in 2010 and 2012 by nominating people who couldn't win in November. In order for the president's agenda to advance, we have to be able to elect people who support the agenda. And so these inter-party skirmishes are all about whether or not we can nominate candidates who can win in November. Now, in 2014 and 2016, we nominated candidates who could actually win elections, and we took the Senate in 2014 and kept it in 2016. So these are inter-party skirmishes about actually winning elections.
They're inter-party
so,
skirmishes, sir, but they now have what he calls a Brutus who doesn't necessarily care about keeping the seat. They just want to defeat incumbent Republicans who support you.
But I think most Republicans want to see us win elections, because I always remind people that the winners of elections make policy and the losers go home and go into some other line of work. And so we're trying to maintain this majority so we can achieve the goals that the president and ourselves share. And so these skirmishes will occur in the primaries. They've happened in recent years, the years in which we have nominated people who could win. We took the majorities, and years in which we didn't, we lost. It's all about whether or not we can maintain control and achieve the things that the president and ourselves want to achieve for the American people.
Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, thank you.
I was reading the live comments along the way, and I saw a couple people at least liked my Toby the Turtle impression before that clip. And, you know, Mitch McConnell was also over on Fox News Sunday, and Dana Perino actually showed a different Steve Bannon clip where Steve Bannon sort of preempted the argument you heard from Mitch McConnell there, because Steve Bannon said, oh, you know, Mitch McConnell's always saying, you know, winners make policy and losers go home, and but Bob Corker is going home, and Luther Strange is going home, and he sort of Luther Strange being the appointed senator from Alabama who is now not running for Senate because Roy Moore is the Republican nominee for Senate in Alabama. And I didn't take the clip from Fox News Sunday just because it was pretty much the same answer from Mitch McConnell you saw there. But in a way it was more remarkable. If I had watched Fox News Sunday before I watched CNN State of the Union, I probably would have taken it, because Mitch McConnell gave that same answer about how winners make policy and losers go home, even though that was like part of what Steve Bannon was refuting in the clip that Dana Perino showed him on the Fox News Sunday version. But anyway, that's my only Mitch McConnell clip. I don't want to, I mean, he is like so focused on the talking points, it might have even been worth showing you the clip, because he gave almost the exact same answer. I don't know how he does it, but he is a very disciplined interview subject. He says the things he wants to say no matter what the question is, and you know, in some ways that's admirable, because that's message control. And I know that's if you're in public relations, or if you're in communications or whatever, that's what you want, is you want to get that message out that exactly the way it was on the paper before you went on the show. And Mitch McConnell is a master at message control anyway. But I actually want to move on to an NBC Meet the Press clip, a couple of them. This is the last clip kind of on the Trump controversy before I get to the final 3 clips more on whether there should be a change in congressional authorization for use of military force. You know, Congress really has the power to declare war, and this military widow was the result of the killing of 4 U.S. military soldiers in Niger. And why are we in Niger? Because there is basically this endless war going on based on the authorization for use of military force way back in September of 2001, after the attack on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, and after September 11th, there were, I think it was September 16th is when 2001 is when this, or maybe September 19th, somewhere in that area. And we're still, that's supposedly the congressional authorization for these 1,000 troops in Niger come from September 2001, right after 9/11, and you'll see Lindsey Graham talks a little bit about that. But first he talks about, I have 2 clips of Lindsey Graham. The first one is more on the controversy between the military families and Trump, and you'll see here Chuck Todd is asking why doesn't he take the high road, and this is about 3 minutes long, and I'll discuss it with you after we watch it together over here.
All right, but look at this week, and you ask yourself, why couldn't he take the high ground? Yeah. On the condolences. That's what it is.
Good point.
Look, it's not about, to me, in business, the customer's always right. In this, the grieving widow is always right.
Right.
I'm sorry. I don't care what the story is. So I guess I ask you, why do you think he couldn't take the high road?
This all started when they criticized, have you reached out to the 4 fallen soldiers' families? Then he brings up President Obama, which is absolutely the worst thing to do. There's no doubt in my mind that President Obama and Michelle Obama, their heart broke every time a soldier fell on their watch. There's no doubt in my mind, having been around President Trump a lot lately, that he loves the military. So General Kelly tried to give him some advice about how to talk about these things. President Trump may have delivered it inartfully, but I can promise you this. If I had been in the car with somebody and President Obama was on the end of the phone, I would not have politicized this like Congresswoman Wilson.
Well, there are no winners here.
None.
And
who the winners are?
It feels as if everybody is trying to sit here and find blame on the other side.
The winners are the American people to have 4 young men
willing to do this,
that would be willing to go and leave their family to a place out in the middle of nowhere to fight terrorists so they don't come here. And I would just urge President Trump, let's talk a little bit about the 4 soldiers. How about a little time on who they were and why they did what they did, and all those like them.
All right. I want to know, I think a lot of people want to know why they were there and what we're doing there. And I'm going to go through a quick timeline here because we don't know a lot. On October 4th, we were told after this happened that it was they were there to do counterterrorism training. October 5th, it was a reconnaissance patrol. On October 6th, we were told they were there to establish relations with local leaders. John Kelly on October 19th, at just 3 days ago, basically said, I actually know a lot more than I'm letting on, but I'm not going to tell you. John McCain had to threaten a subpoena just to get Jim Mattis, Secretary of Defense, to come down and talk to you guys even briefly. What more can you tell us about why we were there and what we were doing?
Well, they're going to brief us next week as to why they were there and what they were doing. I got a little insight of why they were there and what they were doing. I can say this to the families. They were there to defend America. They were there to help allies. They were there to prevent another platform to attack America and our allies. Senator McCain is frustrated, rightly so. We don't know exactly where we're at in the world militarily and what we're doing, so John McCain is going to try to create a new system to make sure that we can answer the question, why were we there? We'll know how many soldiers are there, and if somebody gets killed there, that we won't find out about it in the paper. And John McCain and I think General Mattis are going to come up with a new process, I hope.
All right, you use some...
So there you see Senator Lindsey Graham trying to assert some congressional authority, to find out information, but he is not in favor of asserting the ultimate congressional authority, which is to declare war, or, well, I mean, he does say if we don't like what they're doing, we can cut off funding, and there is something to that, which I will discuss after I show the clip. But I also want to give kudos to Chuck Todd for actually raising the endless war issue, and also he's questioning whether military successes like the driving ISIS out of Raqqa this week, if they're actually successes, which he'll also do when he talks to Chuck Schumer in the subsequent clip. the next clip I'm going to show. But kudos to Chuck Todd for raising the idea of endless war and the need for congressional oversight, and Congress asserting its authority to declare war. Or anyway, I don't like Lindsey Graham's answer for reasons I will discuss with you after we watch that clip here.
You used some alarming words when you said we don't want the next 9/11 to come from Niger.
Yeah.
So you're making the case then that this is all part of the same war that you guys authorized in 2002 and in 2001, that the same war that you authorized that we thought about Afghanistan, then it turned to Iraq, then it's been used for Libya, for Syria, and now we're in another continent.
Yeah, I don't think the forces inside of Niger, the ISIL-affiliated forces, have the capability to attack the United States. But what happened in Afghanistan is that you had a government that fell, replaced by a radical organization, the Taliban, a government that invited international terrorists in and to be their welcome guest. So what I worry about Africa, it becomes the new platform for people to come to. The ungoverned spaces of Africa is where the terrorists will come after you defeat them in Syria and Iraq and Afghanistan. And there are some groups within this system of terrorist groups in Africa that would attack our allies or the United States so they could.
There's no victory here in this war. And I say this because this is a week we got Raqqa back.
That's the ultimate question.
That's the irony. So you get so that we make a substantial progress against ISIS where they were in Syria and Iraq. And yet now it's whack-a-mole, and now they're popping up here. This goes to the same thing we had 10 years ago with, we're pushing Al-Qaeda back, but then Al-Qaeda reformed with a new name.
It's a generational struggle. If you don't think it's a generational struggle, you don't understand the war. If you think it's limited to the Mideast, you don't understand the theology. It is spreading throughout the world, particularly Africa. And if you think it's going to be done in a short period of time, or if you take off means of how you fight this war, if there's an authorization to use force tomorrow that limited the war based on time, geography, and means, I would vote against it, because the war is now morphing. It's going to places that we haven't heard of before, to the American people. We're going to follow the terrorists wherever they go. We're going to use whatever means we need to with partners to destroy them, and whatever time it takes, and most people are not ready for that, but I am.
Are we going to need a new war authorization? It sounds like you're arguing no, but by the way, you're going to be in the minority, aren't you?
I don't know. I'm arguing that the current authorization, as long as it's related to radical Islam, is enough. But the military determines who the threats are. They come up with the engagement policy, and if we don't like what the military does, we can defund the operation. But I didn't know there was 1,000 troops in Niger. John McCain is right to tell the military, because this is an endless war without boundaries, no limitation on time and geography. You got to tell us more, and he's right to say that.
All right, before I let you go, you've come on this show.
So I don't know. What Senator Lindsey Graham is saying there is that he doesn't want Congress to put any limits on this war against terrorism that limits it by time. So, like, you have to be done by a certain amount of time. Geography, like anywhere in the world. That's why we're in Niger and Somalia, and we're still using the 9/11 attacks, the authorization for use of military force from September 2001 to basically attack terrorist groups anywhere in the world, pretty much. And then he doesn't even want limit by means. So, any means, any time, any place, the president has authorization to use force. That's not really what it says here in the Constitution, but Senator Graham is right that Congress's power, if they actually want to stop use of military force, they passed this thing back in the Nixon era called the War Powers Act that supposedly requires the president to give them all these reports, but the constitutionality of the War Powers Act has never really been tested. And back from the Clinton era, when Clinton was bombing the former Yugoslavia, going after Milosevic in Serbia, and the whole Kosovo, Albania thing, and Congress did not authorize that, but then they failed to cut off funding by a few votes, and the Supreme Court said it's, under the Constitution, this is a political conflict between the legislative and executive branches, and if they can't even get together the votes to override a presidential veto to cut off funding for military action, well, then Congress hasn't really used their powers against the executive, and the courts aren't going to intervene in that political debate between the other two branches. So Senator Lindsey Graham is actually correct, at least to the extent that if Congress really wants to stop the executive from pursuing military action somewhere, they have to specifically pass legislation that cuts off funding, and then the courts will enforce that. But if they can't go, it's not just that, you know, you can't just say they didn't declare war and the Constitution says they have to declare war. Well, that's not enough. They have to, like, specifically pass legislation that cuts off funding for maybe like a preemptive first strike against North Korea. That would be nice. That's one of the things that really worries me. Donald Trump might do some, you know, early morning when he's upset and tweeting on the toilet or whatever it is he does. I don't know. But anyway, that's Lindsey Graham responding to the question of whether there should be a new authorization for use of military force. Of course, he doesn't believe that there should be. And Chuck Todd also brings up this issue with the Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, and he spins it a little bit differently than Lindsey Graham. But if you really pay close attention, he just says, you know, we have to look at that. But he also seems to be in favor of all these military adventures all over the world without any limits in terms of time or geography or means. It's not that different from what Lindsey Graham said from the Democratic side, because Chuck Schumer is kind of a war hawk as well, and I will discuss that with you after we watch that clip together over here.
And that, I guess, if you get this briefing and you heard what Senator Graham believes, this is part of the larger battle against radical Islamist fundamentalism and the spread of it, the cult-like spread of it now taking place in Africa. What does this mean for the war authorization? And you heard Senator Graham there. He didn't know we had 1,000 troops in Niger. Did you?
No, I did not. And what it means, Chuck, for the war authorization is I agreed with Senator Paul that we ought to look at this carefully. We are in a brave new world. You know, there are no set battle plans. You don't declare war and then fight 3 weeks later. But having said that, the Constitution says Congress has the power to declare war, and if you're in a long-term war, Congress ought to keep that ability. So we need to re-examine this. We're on a AUMF that extends 16 years from right after we were attacked at the World Trade Center. So I would be for re-examining it, absolutely. There's no easy answer, but we should look at it. The answer we have now is not adequate.
Is this, how do you describe it any other way than never-ending war?
Well, look, terrorism and technology has allowed terrorists to do bad things to us. Our military is very, very good, and that's why we're having such success in Syria and Iraq.
Why is that? Let me stop you there. Why is that considered a success? I say it this way because it seems as if, okay, we had success in Afghanistan until we didn't. We had success in Iraq until we didn't. We had success, you know, Raqqa, and then all of a sudden now it's popping up in Central Africa. The point, I guess, is how do you define success? Because it seems these short-term victories are just that, short-term.
Well, 2 years ago, it looked like the ISIS would have a caliphate. When they had territory, they can get money out of the big cities, Mosul and Raqqa and all the others. They can't do that. Can they still try to hurt us? Yes. And we have to do everything we can to stop it. But to say that we haven't won the war isn't to say that we haven't had some successes.
I don't move to health care.
I don't know. I think Chuck Todd did a pretty good job there of pointing out that these successes don't lead us any closer to ending this endless war. And I think if you listen to what Chuck Schumer said, the Senate Minority Leader, it wasn't that different from what Lindsey Graham said. He said he's willing to look at the authorization for use of military force, but he didn't seem to want to limit any of the ways that we're going after these terrorists or assert any sort of congressional control over it, and that's kind of disheartening. And then the final clip I want to show, I want to contrast what John Dickerson did over on CBS's Face the Nation. He was talking to a Republican Senator, James Lankford from Oklahoma, and he got James Lankford to say what you heard Lindsey Graham say, and also Chuck Schumer say, that, you know, the military has to do more about giving information to Congress. But you'll see John Dickerson didn't even really bring up this whole idea of Congress asserting any authority over the conduct of war or the endless war. That I think that's something that John Dickerson should have done, but never brought up. And like I said, kudos to Chuck Todd for bringing it up on Meet the Press, but boo, bad job to John Dickerson on Face the Nation, never really bringing up the idea that Congress should limit the president's authority to conduct warfare all over the world at any time, with any means, and with no limit from Congress. And this is the final clip for tonight over here.
Your colleagues, Senator McCain among them, has expressed frustration at getting answers out of the administration from the Pentagon. Do you share that frustration?
I do. What Senator McCain focuses on is getting the full story, not getting parts of the story or not getting conflicting stories. So at this point, we have conflicting stories. We want to be able to get the full, accurate story and get it right.
Do you feel like this is a localized problem or a broader one? The president has talked about giving the military greater reign to do its work. Is there a tension in terms of greater reign, but not informing Congress perhaps as much about what the military is doing and where it's doing it?
We're advising and assisting all over the world to be able to help put down al-Qaeda and ISIS and other radical Islamic groups that are around the world that are seeking to terrorize not only the local communities, but as we've learned from Afghanistan, it's not just an isolated region of the world that will never come in and come after us. Obviously, they have come after us before from these isolated regions, so it's extremely important that we do stay engaged. We are typically in the back, and quite frankly, typically these ISIS groups won't attack a United States convoy because they're well protected. They'll attack other UN peacekeepers. They'll attack local police stations. They'll attack local governments or bus stations where they know they're a softer target than to come after a heavily militarized target like ours. So typically we'll see each other and we'll know each other's presence, but they won't actually engage, certainly until now, and we've seen that here.
Let me ask you another question about that.
So, like I said, that is the questioning of James Lankford by John Dickerson, where they did cover the topic of wanting more information, but nothing about the need for Congress under its Article 1 powers. Article 1, that's the first article in the U.S. Constitution, but that, you know, Congress is supposed to be the #1 branch, and it's supposed to have the power to declare war, and also the power of the purse that can decide that the executive can't spend money on fighting endless wars anywhere at any time using any means. But Congress has pretty much given up that power, and that's not something that John Dickerson even brought up on CBS's Face the Nation. So despite getting a little information out of Senator James Lankford on the need for greater congressional oversight over the military adventures all over the world, not that incisive questioning from CBS this morning, I'm sorry to say. That is the last clip for oh, and looks like Sandy's waking up. Just like I was happy to see that Sandy got out of bed. It looked like she might not get out of bed. I'm glad to see almost 200 people watch this as a live show, even without any super chat contributions this week. I saw some of my regular patrons on Patreon were live viewers, so I appreciate those of you who posted comments to keep me company while I was showing the clips, and I did read the comments along the way. Someone asked me to give the Vulcan salute to show I was reading the live comments. I can't read them while I'm talking, which that comment came, but I do go back and read them while the clips are playing, and of course I save all the live comments for the people who watch the recorded show. I put a link down in the video, or down one of the top comment should be my comment to my Patreon page, where I have all the live comments, and you can read those along the way if because they comment on all the clips, and they actually increase my argument that this is a fair use media criticism and political analysis, because those live comments run right along the while I'm showing the video clips, and so I'm not just commenting, but almost 200 live viewers are also commenting. So I appreciate the live viewers. I appreciate those of you who comment on the recorded show, and of course I especially appreciate my patrons on Patreon. You can become a patron just by contributing $1 or $5 or whatever you can afford, if you can afford to support this effort. Since the adpocalypse last April, YouTube does not really support my channel much with advertising, although every now and then ads may appear on my videos. But I appreciate all of you who help me out through Super Chat, through Patreon, and I will try to pay back that support by doing the best I can to pick out the best clips every Sunday. And I will be back next Sunday and every Sunday for the foreseeable future with the best clips from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the big 5 corporate outlets, along with my commentary and criticism, and giving you an opportunity to also comment on and criticize those clips, and also comment on and criticize my commentary and criticism. And until I have a chance to do that next Sunday, or until I have a chance to upload some other kind of edited, produced video of the time and the topic strike me this week, it could happen, who knows. But until one of those things happens, I guess I will be seeing all of you around the internet.